It's the Conquest Sorcerer Kings week, and with a comment, you could win an amazing box set. We will choose 3 winners. One from YouTube, one from OnTableTop.com, and one from our Cult of Games members. So you guys get an extra chance to win.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. I'm joined by Konstantinos.
Hello, everyone.
And we are going to be talking all about the lore of the Sorcerer Kings. Now, the Sorcerer Kings grew up out of essentially a competition where players in the living world got to vote on which faction that they wanted to see next. I was going to say which nation or which army, but in the case of the mercenaries, they weren't really one. They were a hodgepodge. And for each of those, there was a single sort of paragraph explaining the flavor of the faction and what their playstyle was going to be. When you started with the Sorcerer Kings, how did you grow it from that sort of tiny paragraph? Because I know you're always working in the background on expanding the lore in different directions, but when you come to something like that and you don't know which one is going to be selected, presumably you're not doing all the work for all of them up front. You're just going, well, here's a neat idea that we want to start with.
That is partly true, in the sense that a lot of the groundwork for most of our planned factions has been done a long time ago. So we might not always know the details or have, chiseled out every last corner of what that faction is about, but we do have a very specific idea. It was a main concern from early on that we wanted the factions to feel natural and to feel like they belong in the world. They don't come out of nowhere. I mean, in a way, the Sorcerer Kings literally came out of nowhere in the narrative, but if you read the backstory of our world and the history, and especially the history of the fall, their seed is planted there very clearly. And so we knew where we were going. We knew what we wanted. We knew the place they would occupy, not only geographically, but in sense of aesthetics, in sense of culture, and in sense of what they bring into the fantasy world quite early on. So in that sense, it was easy, in the sense that we knew what the Sorcerer Kings were about. Admittedly, there were changes that came from Project 8, as we called that vote at the time, being the 8th faction. Until the release, we did make some changes in the lore that when we started going, okay, now we're focusing into this. We're looking into every dark corner, see what makes sense, clear out what doesn't make sense. We came up with some changes, which we think work better in the narrative overall. But the basic idea was there. Like the aesthetics and the imagery we had for them was there already. And that can be said for, I think, all of the planned factions so far. That being said, we add factions all the time in our head canons. So
just to keep you on your toes.
It won't always be the case, but for now it was. So the Sorcerer Kings always were this kind of introduction to everyday high fantasy, in a way. Like, the world is high fantasy. It's more gritty, it's more dark, it's more grounded in a way, but it is high fantasy. Like in the history, we have a literal god falling down to destroy the earth, like literally, physically.
Yeah.
Doesn't get a lot more high fantasy than that. But what we mean is that the Sorcerer Kings were always this kind of, yes, this is the magical nation. This is where magic and everyday life are together. The economy is combined with the magic. The aesthetic is combined with the magic. The social structure is combined with the magic. Everything is magical in that sense. That was the role of the Sorcerer Kings always in our head, and we're pretty happy with how this panned out. It was also a great opportunity for us to allow our players to explore other aspects of our world that we hadn't so far, because none of the other factions delved that much into that kind of mystical and arcane aspect of our cosmology. It was a happy day when they chose the Sorcerer Kings. We would be happy with any faction, but, you always see, oh, cool, because now we get to see that,
Yeah, and I suppose they show another level of just where the world was at prior to the fall. You have the city-states have the remnants of very high tech. Obviously, the Old Dominion are a thing unto themselves. I'm not worried about them. But the Sorcerer Kings show, well, while the technological level was up here, magic must have been blasé day to day. The ability to use these forces to do whatever. The magics that the initial sort of Sorcerer Kings that fled brought with them are so powerful and elemental. Do you want to talk a bit about that initial sort of setup with them then? The pulling the magic and creating their continent?
Yes. So a couple of things on what you said. It is very true that a lot was lost when with the fall. A lot was lost from the original Old Dominion at its peak. It was also, in many ways, even though it was much higher knowledge, there was much higher knowledge both about science and also magic. It was also very constrained because Haslia had a very firm grip on anything that could be a challenge. So there was even a religious connotation to both those aspects that tied in to mandates from Haslia. Yes, but we shall never do this. And yes, but we shall never do that. And it is interesting because some of these survive. In the city-states, like Plato, the founder of the city-states, who went under the name of Plato, he went further than the Old Dominion, free from the constraints that that his god would impose, until he realized that, yes, but my god is mad and is probably trying to kill us all. So, and it's a very similar thing with magic, and a very similar thing happened with magic. The Archmage of the Old Dominion did some research. One, he realized that there is something wrong with Haslia. He did research that was forbidden, with a goal in mind to actually kill Haslia before he could kill humanity. Then whatever it is that he discovered and whatever his research led to brought him to a halt. He paused his plans and he disappeared, earning the name Anathematic because of his research. His trusted cabal, his closest and most powerful apprentices, however, found that research, or hints of that research that he allowed them to find, probably. And they continued his work with a single purpose in mind. Yes, let's kill Haslia because Haslia is obviously, like our master thinks, Haslia is crazy, so let's strike first. And that is what brought the fall, ironically, or not so much. So there was a taboo there that had to be surpassed for the Sorcerer Kings to become the Sorcerer Kings. And they gladly surpassed it. And especially after the fall, they realized that this is a new, untapped source of magic. In fact, 4 of them, well, more, but they tapped into 4, which were the primordial elemental domains. Think of them as dimensions or planes, elemental planes. They are a different approach, but they are effectively that same. So they found a way to directly tap into that source to enhance their own magic, which was not a new concept because the Old Dominion already knew that humanity is very restricted in the amount of magical power it can wield by default. This is how the world works. But you can surpass this by imbuing items and creating or locations or even individuals, as they later found out, into that you tap that item into that source of power. What the Sorcerer Kings did is they bound themselves directly with denizens and the domains themselves, the elemental domains themselves. And thus they managed a strike against Haslia. It did not kill him, it almost did. When they realized that Haslia intended to fall, they gathered literally parts of the Old Dominion, razed the ground with their newfound powers, with their new unhinged magical potential now that they were tied to the elemental domains. They moved entire populations on top of floating islands across the vast empty sea until they realized that, yes, but we need a place to stay. So their approach in their drunken in power state was, let's make our own continent. And indeed they did. They literally raised the continent out of the depth of the seas, settled the existing flying, as we can see in the images, like flying pieces of the Old Dominion that they brought with them, and created an entirely new culture that was partly influenced by the Old Dominion, partly influenced by subcultures within the Old Dominion, because the Old Dominion were multiple cultures under the religious banner of Haslia, and they created something entirely new. That something new is by default magical. Like raising a continent from the ground has no flora, no fauna that can survive out of the water. It has nothing. So they had to kind of expedite the evolutionary procedure with animals that they had. Think of it as flying arcs, but made of rocks that they were using. Yes. So they tried to expedite evolution and repopulate their continent, or populate their continent with both flora and fauna. This only partly worked, because after the 4 capitals were created, a seat for each of the sorcerer kings and queens, they kind of be, okay, we're good. We're good. This works. We have water, we have plants, we have animals. The rest of the continent remained largely dissolute.
It all radiates out from them, I suppose. So the biggest collection of resources and wealth is closest to the seat of power, and then as you push out into the lower echelons within the nation, I suppose there's less and less resources / nice things. With the Sorcerer Kings then, because obviously raising a continent, bringing the people there, and having birthed a nation, essentially, was it a case that there was a large population brought with them who were kith and kin and other colleagues all brought with to build a small nation, and then they've expanded from there? Or did they get to a point where there was a small cluster that began and then other people have arrived and joined them afterwards?
No, it was based on the population they originally moved, which was quite large. Like they moved pretty much a nation from different parts maybe, but pretty much a whole nation within the Old Dominion. One of the subcultures was moved fully, or almost fully, obviously. But it was a good head start to populate and create their own kind of empire, in a way. It was a good head start that they had. They had a lot of people with them that they tried to save, because these were, the 4 Sorcerer Kings were part of the hierarchy, and they were very high up of the original hierarchy of the Old Dominion. They did have a very, well, some maybe less than others, but they did have, it was part of who they were, that these are our people. And when they saw the result of their hubris, which was to attempt to kill a god, they did try to save as much as they could, and as many, of course, as they could. And it is an interesting contrast that while Plato first and foremost concentrated in safekeeping and spiriting away the amassed knowledge of the Old Dominion, the Sorcerer Kings saved, and he saved a lot of people in the process. That is true, because there was a destination for refugees to go now. The Sorcerer Kings were like, we know our magic, and our apprentices and their apprentices, and the whole cycle is near us, so we have what we need to keep this going, and to make sure that down the line it will still work, because back then they didn't know that they would be effectively deified with what they did. But what we need to do now is save people. We caused this, directly or indirectly. We brought this destruction upon our people. Now, I'm not saying this was entirely altruistic, always, from all of them. I'm not saying that this is still their driving force, although they claim it to be. That is the drive behind the Sorcerer Kings, which is like, we now have the tools to safeguard humanity and the world without having to rely on gods, made up or otherwise. And in a typical manner, being absolutely sure that they know best. They are ready to impose their best view upon others.
On their new continent now, the 4 city-states each bound to one of the leaders and very elementally themed. So they have that sort of feel and flavor. At what point did they go wholesale in with the denizens of other realms and the like? Because that it seems like baby steps. You realize you can garner more power from somewhere, and then it's not long before you're starting to conjure up a Ifrit or talk to Jinn.
I don't think we have really established a kind of timeline for this, and I don't think it's the same for all 4. I think it's only natural to say that each sorcerer king and queen had a different approach to the whole thing. But eventually, and especially at first, I think it is easy to see how, in their excitement about this whole new realm of possibilities that gave them such power to bring down a god, save a bunch of their people, create a whole continent for them, provide for them, they felt, I think, like gods very early on themselves. So in typical human manner, I think they went in stomping at first until they found, no, wait, there's kickback. So let's take it step by step because this is new ground. So I think the early attempts were frequent and very strong and very rash even. For instance, it is easy to see how a fire sorcerer would be very eager to see more, sticking to the theme of fire, being passionate and eager and kind of rushing in. Down the line, there were very pragmatical things that needed to be addressed eventually, and they discovered that this is not 1, but 4 whole new worlds with its own life forms, life and life forms, but intelligences, let's say, which kind of interact with ours. Like when we bind, this mirrors, there is a two-way give and take. And they started realizing that we are actually influencing by our very presence those domains. So it is very hard even for them possibly to understand and truly know about each and every denizen of the domains that they explore, that this was always here and this kind of happened because we happened. I think when they realize that, no, wait, that is interacting with us as much as we are interacting with it, I think that's the first time I think they really took pause and were, okay, step by step, we need to set some ground rules. We need to communicate with these intelligences. We need to bind them. Some of them can be reasoned with, others cannot. Let's take a step back and take this more cautiously to kind of integrate them into our society because our society relies upon it. Like a magical continent being raised isn't necessarily very stable for always. And because of that kind of exploration phase, which has lasted for centuries, over 6 centuries, it is why the continent of the Sorcerer Kings were sealed off from the other world. It was mainly by chance if someone went in through the wind currents that kept everyone at bay and everyone sealed in as well. I think it shows carelessness, but also cautiousness kind of together. Because as they delved deeper and deeper into the domains, they realized, yes, but if somehow this leaks into our world, this would be a huge problem for our world. So let's seal off. Let's start doing our business slowly until we have a better understanding of what we're dealing with here and how this can be integrated. Because this was their main project and their main occupation for so long, the society around them kind of structured around this need. So it is only natural that those with the gift or those without the gift, because they also found a way to bypass the need for a strong gift to wield magic by bonding or force bonding individuals with the domains or beings within the domain. The whole society started being structured around this kind of exploration campaign or these 4 exploration campaigns that were going on. And to enhance this, they were like, okay, but we can use, for instance, the ghouls from the fire domain because they are very good as shock troops. So let's integrate those into our society. Let's see how we use them. And since the people outside, what we call for now the tribes, kind of realize that, yes, and not everything is at peace here in our continent, we need troops. Why not use these? Why not test these? Why not see how they interact with our troops? what happens if I put a little bit of fire into a normal guy? And so on and so forth. So the whole society forged around this kind of exploration expedition that is never ending, because presumably the domains are infinite, as infinite as this dimension. It is a very interesting, and that's why I said very early on that this will be our main avenue into load. This is high fantasy. This is magic and everyday life combined.
It's one of those things that's been brought up before, but just in writing in general, that when you have access to magic of such a high level, it can sometimes cause, I don't want to say stagnation, but if magic will do a thing, then you don't need to look for a better way of doing that thing because magic is there. You don't need to design a combustion engine to replace the horse because you can transport or teleport automatically. Do you see that sort of thing within the Sorcerer Kings realm then, where it's just so focused on the magical side that everything is geared towards it, and I suppose almost like a caste system developing, in that you have the people who have magic innately, and then you have people who have to be brought to or forced to use magic in a certain way, and they sort of come in at another tier, if you will.
Yes, I think so. I think it is I think it's a natural kind of evolution of that society. Again, with that kind of expedition and main goal in mind for centuries, it makes sense that that guy can do more. That guy understands more. That woman can rule better because she understands the balances between our world and the domain. I think it was natural. Of course, like any system, it wasn't pure meritocracy, and it never is. It gets dilated down the line. But yes, I think it's very natural to kind of expect the Sorcerer Kings to have this magicocracy, magocracy rather, magocracy in a way. And that science would not be ignored, but it would lose interest. Like, people would lose interest in science, partly because of what you say, and partly because this society was founded by 4 people who were really devoted to their craft already centuries ago. By the time they reached the level that they could create the Sorcerer Kings as a nation and raise an entire colony, they were already very dedicated to their craft. And they had achieved much more than any but one during their lifetimes and at their peak. So I think it makes sense. I think it also creates a nice kind of contrast with with the city-states, which is the other side of the same coin, though. The 2 guys that realized Hazlitt is going to kill us created 2 fundamentally clashing societies. Not to say that the city-states are not magical. It's just that they approach magic more methodically, more like a science, to the point where they seem almost spire-like, if you will, that their magic is a science and we need to approach it as a science. It is measurable and we can calculate results, because it's not like they use steam engines in the city-states. In fact, there are very strong policies about exploring pure science. And the idea is that they've understood that science could be done by anyone. Eventually. What science creates can be wielded by the one who wields it. It is far more dangerous than magic, who, at least the guy who wields magic, has to go through some learning process. So I think it's a very interesting contradiction. The 2 sides of the same coin, though, because Plato, in a way, also achieved ascendance like the 4 Sorcerer Kings, but through the crafted gods, effectively, that he created. And their society is it's very different, but also so similar, because they are both from the higher echelons of the Old Dominions hierarchy, and they have, even though they are so different, they have very similar concepts about how to approach things, which I find fascinating. And it's why I find it so interesting that the first place and the first clashes between the Sorcerer Kings were with the city-states. Immediately, it's the 2 sister ideals clashing.
What next for the Sorcerer Kings then, I suppose? Now, they've suddenly been reintroduced to the world who were not expecting them. And now you have a very powerful nation just off the southern coast of the main continent. And and they're all of a sudden coming across a whole slew of nations, factions, and races that presumably a lot of them were completely unaware of. Is there ruminations and plans building within the Sorcerer Kings then to lay their claim, I suppose?
Yes. But that is also the problem in having 4 leaders. That each of them has a different approach, and right now fire and air are kind of aligned in the meaning of, yes, we want to go out and we want to establish a foothold, and their approach theoretically is we want to bring more into this. Why? Because we are the best chance that humanity has to survive against the primordial dangers that are out there. Like, who more suitable to fight a possible second breaking from the Dwegum than those that understand the elements that the Dwegum will use? Who will better counter the husk or remnant or the undead creations of the very god that they themselves killed in the first place? So there is a lot at work, and there is one golden rule that we need to remember, or well, 3 golden rules that we need to remember in our world. And one of those 3 is that power attracts power. From the moment the Old Dominion kind of opened up, and the Dwegum also came out, and the Wadrun crossed, even though the Wadrun are more down to earth as a faction, there is a cascade of things that is in our world natural. It's how our world works. When something powerful rises, something else will rise to counterbalance it. It is a byproduct of the age of balance that we're in, because it's not a perfect age of balance. It's kind of constantly struggling to maintain itself age of balance. So it needs to go into drastic kind of measure and take drastic measures. It's kind of like the immune system of this age, that when I see that something very powerful rises, I need to create something to oppose it, to maintain the balance and make sure that neither of them destroy the thing that I so preciously maintain to keep my brothers at bay: creation and destruction. So the Sorcerer Kings, their goal is to safeguard humanity. It is the same as it was 6 centuries ago. They recognize, because they do have kind of a higher understanding of how the world works than possibly most of the rest of the world, they do recognize that their very presence will possibly cause a reaction, but they believe they are prepared for such reactions. That is one approach. The other is that just how they saw that Hazlia is probably about to do something horrifying, something else is about to do something horrifying, and again, we will be needed. In any case, their goal, not to sugarcoat it, maybe, their goal is to safeguard humanity, even if humanity doesn't really want to be saved by them. So
the adults are back in the room. Children, don't worry. We'll sort this out. All you need to do is submit to us, and we'll carry you along. Exactly.
And it's that kind of hubristic approach that we are the only adults, but they're not. Like, you cannot say to the remnants of divinities created by Plato that, no, we are truly humanity. No, I am. Or the 100 Kingdoms seem to be lacking this, but they have this 2 religions that speak about a god that will save them and a god they need to protect. And they go, and others, so a whole sub-faction within the 100 Kingdoms are like, no more gods, no more super powerful things. No, enough. We see what this can do. You have the Nords, which have their own deities or the blood of their deities in their everyday. Nobody wants them. Nobody wants to be saved by someone outside.
Oh no, that's fantastic. I think we'll leave it there, folks. If you've any more questions, please drop them in the comments below. We'll pass them across to Konstantinos, or you can get involved in the chat down there. Obviously, there is the living world and all of the history as well for the Sorcerer Kings over on the Para Bellum website. Stay tuned for more videos this week about the Sorcerer Kings. Bye-bye.
It's the Conquest Sorcerer Kings week, and with a comment, you could win an amazing box set. We will choose 3 winners. one from YouTube, one from OnTableTop.com, and one from our Cult of Games members, so you guys get an extra chance to win.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.